Welcome back to another MobileSentrix tips and tricks. My name is Derek, and today I'm going to be showing you a repair and a product. The repair today is going to be an HDMI on a PS5. I'm going to share with you some of my tips and tricks on how to make this repair super easy. Let's get into the video. I've had a bunch of people ask, what is this and how do I use it? This is a solder sucker designed to help extract solder from a logic board in lieu of wick. And I'm going to be demonstrating this tool on a PS5. There will be a link in the description where I show how to replace the fan connector after it's torn off the board. But in this video, I want to focus on tips and tricks to replacing the HDMI and using a solder sucker to help in the process. Comes with a set of instructions on how to load it and how to fire it and where to place the tip, how to take it apart to empty it as well, because eventually you'll have solder on the inside that you'll want to clean out, just like you would any other vacuum. Eventually it needs to be cleaned. It also has additional lengths of the rubber tube here that allows for a more precise suction when it comes to the actual board. But it's pretty straightforward. We're gonna click it down like that, and when everything is ready, all you do is you push the button and it sucks everything right up. The process for this is fairly straightforward. What I'm going to do is take some 138 solder paste, and what I want to do is bring down the overall temperature that the board needs to get to. So what I'm going to do is add some 138. I can be extremely generous with the amount that we're going to use here, because it's all going to get removed eventually. I'll take my soldering iron. You want to avoid knocking off the diode. And what we're going to do is basically mix the solder with the factory solder, bringing the overall temperature that it needs to get to down. So I'm just going to keep moving this around, and that 138 is going to blend in with the factory solder. Let's go on the other side and do the same thing. Now we've got plenty of 138 kind of infused into the board all the way down to the other side. Now we'll flip it around and we're going to add some solder paste down towards the pins, get out some flux. Take our iron, and we want to mix as well the 138 onto the pins. Now there's a little capacitor that we need to avoid. As long as you're aware of it, it's kind of hard to hit. Alright, now that we've gotten some 138 on all of the pins there, I know that when we heat this up, the solder that's mixed into the legs, the solder that's on the pins, everything's going to pull off cleanly without pulling any of the pads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in from below, and we're going to heat up the board, the entire board, and that's going to liquefy the solder that we've put on in the legs and on top of the board as well. And when it's ready, it's just going to come off. Got my temperature set as high as I want it. Alright, so now what we can do is remove the solder from the through holes, and very similar to the way we removed the HDMI port, I'm going to also remove the solder, which is we load up our solder sucker, take the heat from below, and when it's ready we'll pull the trigger. Now we'll add some flux, get out some wick, and we'll wick up all the pads. Nice and free of any of the 138. We'll get our new HDMI port and we'll push it on down in. Now I've got my 183 solder paste I'm going to use for the rest of the repair. Starting with the legs here, the through holes. We're going to add a little bit of solder now just to secure it in place so it doesn't move. And we'll go back later and add more, but I'm just gonna get that solder paste melted and onto the legs there. Nothing crazy. And we'll do the same on the other two. A little bit and with the iron. And that'll be enough to hold it in place. Now we'll go over to the microscope because all of that I was able to comfortably do by eye. But now we want to go over to the microscope and verify that all of the pins are going to have a nice contact and no bridging is going to occur between them. So.
Now this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to take some 183 solder paste and we'll go and touch each individual pin. I really don't mind if there is bridging at this point because it actually will serve to help me out. We'll add some flux when necessary and continue to move that solder around. Carefully going around, making sure we don't knock off the capacitor there. Making sure we leave ample amounts of solder on all of the pins. Flip the board around to have easier access to this other side, and we're going to do the same thing. Dragging the iron around will help me move the solder from one pin to the other, depositing the maximum amount of solder on each one of the pins without bridging. So if I continue to move the bridge around, it'll leave behind the correct amount of solder on each pin, and I won't have any bridging. So keep moving that around and you'll see eventually we'll have zero bridging. And this is what I'm left with. Perfect joints between the pins and the pads on the logic board with plenty of solder, creating a nice ramp down to the board.
So the last step that I like to do after ensuring that every single pin is perfect, no bridging, plenty of solder, nice and strong, is just reinforce the legs. We're going to go in and add some extra 183 to both sides there. I'm going to come in with my hot air.
And I'm going to start with a low airflow with a high temperature here, and what I'm really looking to do is warm up the logic board itself all the way through to the other side. As I do this, the solder will begin to pool and collect around the individual legs, and the solder will travel all the way through and up the legs on the other side of the board, giving me a solid joint. So I'm going to increase the airflow now that the board's warming up, and I'll continue to increase it until I get a nice pool of solder collecting around each one of the legs. You'll see that eventually the solder will start to melt and all pull together. You can see some bubbling from below. That means that the flux and solder is traveling to the other side of the board, which is a good sign. And here I can see it start to condense onto the legs there. And eventually it'll all dive down through to the other side of the board. And while it's still warm, we'll go to the other side and do the same thing. This one will be a lot quicker because the board is nice and hot. It'll all pull together and suck down in like that.
And we'll leave it with a factory finish. Adding some isopropyl alcohol. Cleaning up any of the residual flux. And heating it up like that ensured that the solder actually traveled through the board and came out the other side, spreading up on the legs a little bit, creating a nice solid joint all the way through and through on both sides so that it is less likely to have any issues down the road now that that job is better than factory. And there you go, replacing the HDMI. Tips and tricks, this definitely helps in removing the solder from those through holes because Wicking them out is tricky. Now, there are tricks to getting around using something like this. That would be involved using wick, the iron, and the heat gun all at the same time. But being able to use this and the heat gun, or this and the soldering iron, makes it a lot easier. So as you can see, having the right tools and knowledge can leave you with a better than factory installation, making it more durable and hopefully last longer, as this console will have continual wear and tear on that HDMI port. Leave a comment below if there is something that you would do different. Don't forget to like the video on your way out. Thanks a ton for watching. We'll see you in the next video.